Hey everybody, it's Laura Kingen, ready for another live demo. Wednesday, try to aim for 1:15. I apologize. I know it's an issue of mine. Again, I hope all of these videos that I do for you all are worth it. You can see I've been running around. Today, I would like to talk about exercise balls. These exercise balls are a piece of equipment that I've been using for, 35 years. And so I'd like to share some things with you. I would like to welcome my new followers. I've discovered a few new pages on Facebook and noticed that there's been some new followers from all around the world, which really confirms my suspicions. As a registered and licensed occupational therapist, I've been studying sensory mechanisms for 40 plus years. But I'm finding that a lot of people don't know about this. And I've dedicated my career, my life, my working life to the sensory mechanisms to help improve functioning, which I am coming from a physiological, a brain issue. I know there's been a lot of discrepancies about behavior and in autism, for example, where people are taking a pure behavioral approach. And heaven knows with autism, there's a lot of behaviors that can come if you have autism or even on the spectrum of autism. Gosh, how long ago was that? In 1984, I started working at St. Luke's Behavioral Health Center in Phoenix, Arizona. They had a really great sensory integration program in conjunction with the psychiatric care that was provided through St. Luke's. And I just happened to catch the wave, the right wave, and worked there and learned about integrating sensory issues with behavior and even psychiatric issues. On a very side note, I know a lot of OTs are going into coaching, but there's a lot of people that have some very serious diagnoses. And as occupational therapists, we are trained, educated, trained, and are licensed to work with these more severe cases. I know funding's an issue. And so I've been struggling financially too. We all have been. And what's helped me is people out of the goodness and the kindness of their hearts offering their time, talent, and treasure to me for my benefit. And so that's what I'm trying to do with you all. I have lots of free videos that I've been building over time. I've been doing these weekly live demos since July of 2020. You can go to Facebook and YouTube, you can find my videos. Lots and lots of free stuff to help bring out into the world, really, some education about sensory dynamics. Part of my intention is to offer this so that I can refer back to my videos so that you know what I'm talking about. And I'm already, minutes into this presentation. But to share with you, I want to talk a bit more, and then I'm going to do some actual practical things. But I feel like there's so many people out there who are struggling financially. So hopefully these videos will help give you lots of information to help you in dealing with some of the challenges of autism. It seems like, I guess the older I get, parents seem younger and younger these days, so I don't know how educated you all are, but it seems like this is a lot of really important information. So I'm going to present some activity ideas and suggestions and safety considerations and all for you to just take it and make it your own. I am obviously available for therapy services, evaluations, treatment, individual, group. Certainly can do sensory diets, and to me that would be a shorter evaluation. I could do full school OT evals, but that's more lengthy. So I have this free stuff, but I also am available to give you guidance, whether it's a one-time shot or if you want to come for regular therapies. But what I really would like to do is offer groups where I present a topic or we have groups that people come back to, whether they have a sensory diet or not, and we work together to problem solve the different challenges that you all have. And doing it through like a parent question and answer, you benefit from my expertise as well as from what other parents have gained in their knowledge base. So I'm trying to offer some different kinds of things to you all because I think it's a very serious issue that I think is, over my career, I've developed a lot of information that I think can be helpful to you all. So I think that that's probably all that I really want to say as far as like an introduction. So let's talk about some different aspects about the developmental balls. And let's get more into the activity part of this. And you can always PM me if you have any questions. I think the first thing that I want to talk about is sizing of these balls. Now, I want to talk about sizing and positioning. Those are the first two key things. Now, I am lying kind of quadruped. See, I have two iPads going, and it's still the nuances of the positioning and everything. I'm not a filmmaker, so hopefully you'll be able to see this, and this will work for you. So, sizing. I have these two balls that I want to point out. But I've definitely, I have a clinic, and a lot of my equipment is at my clinic. I could do these demos at the clinic, but I figured for purposes of you all being at home, might as well just work within my own home as well, and to model, these kinds of things. So this ball, to me, is a little small if I want to sit on this ball. I was taught that I want like 90 degrees at my hips, 90 degrees at my knees, and 90 degrees at my ankles in order to have like real solid stability on the balls. So you can see it's a little bit of an angle. And this ball is just about right, isn't it? I tend to I'm going to make it just an adjustment. I apologize. I try here. Now hopefully I won't cut off my head. I've wanted to do some more professionally oriented videos, but it's the best I can do, right? The best we all can do. The idea as an occupational therapist is to make it functional, so hopefully this is functional to you all. So this ball is actually a tad big for me, but it's very deep. There's a lot of room. It could be more inflated. And that's one of the considerations with these balls, is how tight do you want these balls. So this one is actually pretty squishy. So when I sit on it, it does kind of give me the angles that I want, even though it shows my belly. So it's got the 90 degrees. I am tippy-toe though, so this ball is a little big for me. So it's not perfect, neither is your world perfect, but we do what we can. For example, how many of you even have balls? How many of you have these exercise balls? I love these, and in therapy, the art of therapy to me is finding pieces of equipment or activities that can cover a lot of territory. And these balls, it's like it is an added extremity to me. I've carried these kinds of balls around for 35 years because they're so versatile, and there's so many different kinds of things that you can do with these balls. So I think it's well worth the investment. However, there are definitely safety issues. We'll get to that in a bit. If you do not have an exercise ball, but would like to utilize some of these principles that I'm going to be talking about today, or activity ideas, some ideas: cushions. The thing about the exercise balls, like I alluded to before, it's about the brain. And when we talk about sensory, we think about the five senses: hearing, vision, smelling, tasting, touching. But as an occupational therapist, we add in movement as well. And we elaborate on the tactile sense. Just on a brief side note, the tactile could be light touch or deep pressure. For most people, the light touch is a very alertatory kind of a mechanism, like for safety. It also helps us with discrimination. I think the deep pressure can help with the discrimination too. But there's this light touch, and then there's the deep pressure. Two different types of touch that's so important that we need. And what I have found in my career, personally and then in my studies, many people with autism, who are on the spectrum, who have some developmental disabilities, could very well have issues with processing tactile sensations. So as a therapist, and let me take that a step further. And what I have found, and what in the literature and whatnot, us experts are talking about, is that kids can either be hyper or hypo responsive. That some kids are, it just takes a little tiny bit of stimuli and they're way escalated. As opposed to this continuum where you have people who are hypo responsive, who it takes a lot of effort to get them to register sensory information. So what we're trying to do here is exaggerate the sensory input, really depending on that particular individual, because we're all different. And that's where the evaluation comes in. As an occupational therapist, we evaluate to determine what the strengths and weaknesses are and where that person is functioning at, so that we can make appropriate recommendations. One of the comments I had read is that a parent was commenting about her kid, and it's like their kid doesn't respond to any, how do I want to say this? It was in response to someone else's kid being really hyperactive and always constantly on the move and all. And she's like, my child doesn't ever do that. And I'm like, well, that's because on this continuum or on this spectrum, it sounds as though that child was probably very hypo-responsive and really needed a lot. So those kids are probably going to be less your problem type of kids. They're just going to sit in the corner and kind of do their own thing. And they may stim on something or focus on something, but they're not doing a whole lot. It's because their nervous system needs a lot more oomph. But yet the kids who are hyper-responsive, we want to exaggerate the input too, but we have to be very careful. And we are, as an OT, we do come up with plans of treatment to match the person with the activities. So you can exaggerate input with hyper and hypo, but you have to be careful. And use your intuition, use your gut instincts, and consult experts if you need to. So that was kind of a whole side explanation to talk about the deep pressure. We're trying to exaggerate this input to help the brain kind of connect and wake up. So if you don't have a developmental ball, some of the things you can use is this cushion, same type of thing. You'll have to adjust a little bit the instructions that I'm offering to the pillow, but those principles I think can still apply. You're not going to have the mobility or the movement with the pillow, which is just another reason why these balls are just such a great investment. Again, they can be very dangerous too. We'll talk about that. Excuse me. Just some other ideas, something like this. Regular pillow. Cushion. Or that's a pillow, but these cushions are great fun. Highly recommend them. Like for crash pads for one. So do the best you can with the adaptation on that. To finish up talking about sizing, I have worked with toddlers that are like yay big. And I have some balls that are about this big, and I have one purple pink ball, it's about this big, for this little tiny girl I used to work with, and I would sit her on the ball and bounce, and she loved that. But it's a testament to the sizing. Now, I could put that same toddler on this ball, but I'm going to be working on some different kinds of things. One thing I do want to reference, a video I want to reference that I did is on performance components. As an occupational therapist, we look at performance components. Well, what does that mean? Well, and I want to use the second term, activity analysis. When I evaluate an individual, I look at performance components. I'll look at areas like the physicality. What are all the different types of physical skills involved in a particular task? What are some of the mental components? What are some of the emotional components? And what are some of the spiritual or social, and then what I like to include spiritual into that as well. And I evaluate, and depending on where that person is functioning, then I'm going to do an activity analysis and match my activities for a good match. So taking a toddler, and let's say this is going to be my pretend ball. It's actually like a bolster even. This is my adaptation for my child. So I put my child on here, and I can maybe like bounce or do some postural kinds of balance challenges with this child. But the child's feet is going to be on the floor. So that's going to be different than if I put the child up here. A lot of similarities, but different. And that little bit of a difference can mean a tremendous amount, really. Just the nature of having the feet off the floor. I mean, there's nuances to therapy. I know free work is helpful, and there's lots of benefit. But sometimes we do need an expert view or opinion. Thusly, therapy. It's my marketing plug for OT. But just note, and when you are working with your child, and you do something that subtly different, they don't like it after that. Well, there's a reason for that. Why? And what I'm trying to point out here is to be conscious of different choices, so that if this activity is working well, and then I go to shift it and put the child up here, the child doesn't like it. We have to be very careful about trying to force the child to do something. Their behavior, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, is saying something. Now, certainly, human beings, actually animals, I've seen even, they could be manipulative or try to, get their own way. And that gets into a whole different territory. Why am I going there? I'm not sure. But it can come up, and I'm seeing a lot of conversation about managing behavior. And I intend to address that. Whether I actually put a focus on behavior itself, I would rather work with the sensory mechanisms and let behavior kind of work itself out, because I truly believe working with the sensory mechanisms will help eliminate a lot of the behavior right there. Because I think so much of behavior is because individuals' needs are just not being met, and they're doing the best that they can to communicate. And a lot of behavior, especially like a lot of kids will bite themselves, that's a hard one. And I think that has to do with frustration and communication. But again, that's a different story. And I'm kind of getting off a little bit. So wanted to point out some adaptations. And I think I've done that. So let's talk about positioning. Sorry, I want to finish up about sizing. So just be conscientious about which size balls you're going to use and for what and why. There's so many different choices we can make. Watch your child, watch the responses, and let that be your guide. We talk about energy. One of my biggest guides is when I do something with somebody, does it help them to expand, and do they look fuller and happier, more satiated? Or if I do something and their response they tend to withdraw or pull in or look away, those nonverbal cues are vital. They're very important. use them. And they're communicating. It's up to me to determine what are they trying to communicate. Because there's also been discussions about punishment. And that's a tough one. And I think so much of that has to do with the external environment. Because we're dealing with nervous systems that are either damaged, traumatized, injured, compromised somehow. And if we're unable to understand where that person's coming from, it could add to their stress. So just be conscientious about sizing. Let's talk about positioning. In the video I did on balance, it was, I think, my first or second video that I did, I talked about positioning. And so I'll reference you all back to that video. But I want to review some of that, but do it in regards to the balls. So I'm going to use the green ball for this one. We'll see about the angle. So as I started out before, I was in quadruped, but I'm referencing the developmental sequence, the motoric or motor developmental sequence. When human beings are born, they go through motor patterns before we get to the point where we can get up and walk and have independent mobility and that kind of stuff. So those of you that do have children or have had children may have seen some of these different kinds of things, or you can think back, oh yeah, when my baby was an infant, with infants, they're either on their backs or on their bellies, pretty much, right? That's all the motor capacity, how do I want to say? That's about the capacity that they have, motorically. And as they start to grow and go through primitive reflexes, more independent movement is added. So when we start out in prone. You've seen, I've done some of the yoga, incorporated some of the yoga positions in my videos. So the plank pose, think plank pose, to me is, for UOTs out there, is like a perfect anti-gravity position, which is like, or it reflects a more mature, refined, anti-primitive reflex position. Hopefully that makes sense to you all. So prone, this is kind of like a modified plank pose, by the way. So if I've evaluated somebody and I know that they have balance issues that are really quite primitive, I want to use a developmental frame of reference and go back to where they're functioning in a more effective way. And sometimes that's all the way back down to the prone position, and really strengthen their functioning in that particular position. So when I use these developmental balls, and you see me in my videos, I love these balls, without getting too silly with that, because there's so many things you can do. So I'll start with like a modified quadruped on all fours or prone with some weight bearing, and that's the basis of my activity. And then I get to add things onto it. So some weight, like, people with handwriting issues, so much of it, is about the strength. So we do a lot of weight bearing. My hands are, see, you could just barely see it in the image here. So I'm putting I'm bearing weight on my joints, my upper extremities, on my arms. So that's one of the things that we do a lot. And then we do a lot of shifting back and forth. There's a lot of reasons why we do that. I think that ball's too big. Reaching out and so it's, I can also see my arms, oh my goodness. Adjustments. So I can do something just here, or I can add something and have them go, reach out of their space. But this is the basis of my activity. There's so many different things. but I feel like I'm stuck. Because what I want to point out is the power of the ball itself. It's a little hard to bounce like this on the ball, so I wouldn't necessarily do that in prone, but I'll do some of the reaching. So there is on your belly, all fours. And then I'm going to demonstrate on this one is the sitting. So this is where I was getting stuck because I want to point this next concept out to you, and that's about the bouncing. And it's much harder to do that in the prone position on that ball. I also mentioned supine. It's kind of hard to do supine on these balls, but I'll get to that. So I want to emphasize the power of the bouncing on this ball. Not even just from a sensory standpoint, but even from if you're working on trying to like detox or get your lymph moving, bouncing, like jump roping or trampolines have been recommended for that. Well, this too. Now, I want to be careful if I have somebody who has arthritis, or I have to be careful about joint conservation kinds of things, because this can kind of put some stress. I probably wouldn't do this with somebody who's elderly as I get closer. So be conscientious about that. I've definitely worked with some people with some joint problems, and so this would probably be contraindicated for that, okay? But there's something about bouncing, and for those autistic individuals or those on the spectrum who seek a lot of movement and are bouncing around, or kids who are aggressive, it's amazing how much something like this can help channel that need to the point where that part of the brain gets kind of satiated and they can kind of move on. I'm a testament. I've seen it happen. So, I mean, it's a suggestion. You might want to try it. Because I think a lot of times the kids who are aggressive, this is going back to 30 years plus, kids who are aggressive, what is this? It's the same thing. It's like they're giving them their brains the sensory input that they need, right? So why not? Now, on that note, when you're sitting, your backside's getting the input, right? So with these balls, is using the balls and getting it like to the different parts of your body. Like even like lying on your belly. It's more than just your bottom area that's getting the stimulation. That we want all of our body needs this proprioceptive deep pressure input. So, you know, kids who are having to sit all the time, it's probably too much of a demand a lot of the time. So if they're struggling with academics, again, it depends on the evaluation in each individual, but very likely taking a break, being able to just kind of discharge some energy, get some input. For most people, the deep pressure is calming. For about 15% of the people, light touch is calming. So there's going to be some people out there that are going to be like, my kid doesn't like the deep pressure. They don't like the ball. My kid responds to light touch. There are some people like that. And Lorna Jean King, I worked with her back in the early 80s in her clinic. She taught me about that. About 85% of the people find deep pressure calming. About 15% find light touch as calming. And that has held true in my career. I would say about 15% of the people I've worked with find light touch as calming. Most people find deep pressure, like a massage, a Swedish massage, as calming. So rolling the entire body, right? Now, I'm doing a wheelbarrow walk, a modified wheelbarrow walk. Lots of different kinds of things you can do. And I could keep talking about exercise balls for a long time. As an adult, one of the things, and I'm just going to briefly talk about this. For me, even, like if I would go to the gym or whatever, or here at home, and do some exercises, I might use the exercise balls. And one of the things, I'm mentioning this because of positioning. So what I'm now doing is like a side lie. Whoa. I'm doing a sideline. Those of you that know yoga, you know the position? See, I do a modified position in that. But you can work on different positions. So the side, doing sideline, no kneeling and no standing on the balls, okay? But, let's do this ball. But I might kneel at the ball. Why? I don't know. There's different kinds of things you can do. This is definitely working on the balance, okay? So that's sizing. We're starting to get there in time. So there's a couple of things. One other thing I want to talk about is, I think, there's two things I want to talk about. This is a ball, and then I want to do self-regulation. So I haven't even gotten to the point yet to talk about, this is a ball. I haven't done anything that we would normally think of with a ball to this point of yet. But this is a ball. There's so many different kinds of things that you can do with balls. Hopefully that makes sense. So I could sit on this ball and then throw this ball to another person. One of my most favorite activities is using these exercise balls and have me and my client do an exchange with the ball. So if I throw the ball to you, you throw it to me. I throw it to you, you throw it to me. It's a reciprocal exchange. It can be nonverbal, but to me, it's like a precursor or a foundational skill to simple socialization, right? Again, taking communication out and just, I throw it to you and you throw it back, and then building on that. Depending on where my client is at, I may roll it. I may catch some air and bounce it. I may bounce it first before it gets to my, I don't want to say opponent, to my a participant. There's all kinds of things. I could put something on the floor as a marker and have somebody try to throw the ball onto that spot. So now we're starting to get into perceptual skills. And then we can add in academics. But really where I've been focusing on is so way below to the very basic physiology of how do we integrate sensory mechanisms and how valuable an exercise ball can be to help you accomplish that objective. I know this is backwards and I apologize. And I'm not going to take the time to flip the iPads around. This is a book. I have a couple copies. I have one that's just shredded. I definitely recommend that. It goes back a couple decades now, I guess. But I think that that's written for more like a layperson, parents, teachers, to understand sensory integration and what it's about. And so there's a graph in there. Let me pull that out. I'll show you. Where it talks about, these basic types of sensory input and how these different combinations of input, how these senses become integrated and evolve, it works on these other kinds of functional skills to the point where we get to fully functioning academics and independence and our activities of daily living skills and that kind of thing. So we're bringing it way back down. And then again, depending on the performance components you want to emphasize based on your evaluation or based on what you want to work on, there's almost like an infinite amount of combinations of things that you can do. Like, for example, now, I know I was sitting on the ball to do that ball exchange demo, but a lot of times we're standing, right? You're standing and you're throwing the ball back and forth. And then you can have them use the ball to bounce the ball off your hip. You know, doing creative, fun things like that can then work on body awareness skills, right? Something that's a huge issue for so many people is bilateral motor coordination. If the two sides of the body do not coordinate real well, there's probably some primitive reflexes involved that's preventing that movement from happening. And if we are unable to really coordinate the two sides of our body, like crossing midline, this is the midline of our body, that it's fascinating to watch this. People have problems with crossing the midline of the body. Time and time again. They may actually, hold on here. They'll write with this hand and they'll get to the midline and then they'll take the pencil and write this way. So they're not crossing over. Well, why would we want to do something like being able to cross midline of our body? Well, two perfect examples. Three. I don't know why I just thought of a golf club or a baseball bat or a broom to sweep. What about blow drying your hair? These are functional activities that we do that are going to be impacted if you have issues with bilateral motor coordination. So just as an activity idea, is both sides of the body are doing the same thing and hitting the ball like this. Now, we get silly in OT. And I think that's okay. And I think the kids really like to be silly. Kids are silly. But it really helps because then when a line is crossed, then you can incorporate discipline in a much lighter, fun way, if that makes any sense. No punishment is involved, but to be silly about things. And in that, it's like, okay, but here's the boundary. It takes a lighter approach about learning about limit setting and all. That's a whole subject in and of itself. But I think some silliness is great. So my goals are being met, and if we can do it in a fun, playful way, all the better, right? So let's pretend I'm the client and the OT is over outside of the camera. So I'll roll the ball this way and that way, okay? So the activity could be, I'll roll the ball, it comes in towards me, and then I hit it like this. Hit it like that. It comes back to me, and then I hit it again. So some of the different performance components I'm working on, especially if I'm sitting on a ball or a swing or some other kind of apparatus, it's just that much of a fuller activity. But this kind of is giving that, when I hit it like that, it's giving the deep pressure proprioception, some joint compression with the bilateral motor coordination. So we're working on that symmetry, and the repetition and the reinforcement is just one activity idea that I spent a lot of time on. So, with a lot of people. So that might be something that you can be creative with. And instead of having, this is how I work. Instead of being very rigid, it has to be this way and this way, or sitting at a table. So many kids with developmental issues need to move, and they need to integrate with the senses. And from there, we can work on behavior and learning, academics, socialization. But we're meeting more of our clients' needs when we incorporate the sensory piece. And why the sensory piece has been an issue, I'm not sure, because I don't know if it's obstruction, if I get myself into trouble. I think the sensory piece, it's physiological, and it's way important. So I hope that this information can get out to you all in a way that can be helpful to you. So the final piece that I'd like to do, see, I'm almost 45 minutes into this. I can talk about exercise balls and all this stuff for a long time. But at the end of my demos, I like to do quiet time. At the end of my sessions, I like to do quiet time. And these live demos are no exception. Because I want to incorporate active participation or things that you all can do at home too. So in today's calming activity is going to be a little more of a demo activity, but you can see some of the other videos that I've done. I try to always present something different to give you all different ideas of what you can do. Let me switch balls. Because one of the most important pieces is about self-regulation. How do we regulate ourselves? Even as normal functioning adults, what is that? And you know, we go throughout our day, we kind of wake up and we start to build in our arousal level, and then in the middle of our day, we're busy. Middle of my sessions, we should be busy. There's a lot of activity in the middle of my sessions, but then we calm back down. Because if we get busy and then we don't calm ourselves back down, then we kind of go off and we're off and running. And I think we've seen a lot of that in the last year. How do we emotionally regulate? I mean, it fits for emotional regulation as well. We get emotional, and if we don't have the mechanisms to calm ourselves back down, we can get ourselves into trouble, right? And we're off and running. So throughout our day, and this is true especially for kids with autism, look at the routines and structure. It's so important. A lot of the kids are needing the sensory breaks much more often than what we would expect for like someone normally functioning. Whatever that means, right? So we all need those kind of breaks, you know? We kind of peak and then we come back down. We peak and then we come back down. Peak and come back down. The exercise balls are a great way to help you. So there's a couple of things I want to show you with these balls. These balls give more of the deep pressure proprioception, but they can also offer movement or vestibular input, which I haven't even really talked about yet. So the vestibular is a rocking back and forth. Let's see how well I can do this. It's really important to go rhythmically. Now, I'm struggling here, and so I'm going to stop. And the reason is, for quiet time, I think it's important to be able to put yourself in a place where you can do the least amount of effort. If you've ever done a yoga class, Shavasana at the end, the idea is to put yourself in a position. It's actually what the dead corpse pose, where you just lie flat and you don't do anything. So if I want to do some calming through movement on the ball, that's okay, but I'm working a lot still. The rhythmical input from my brain going back and forth, depending on each individual, eventually should tell my body to calm down. So rhythmical movement. I even wonder about rhythmical music. It's more calming to the nervous system, right? But if I'm having to work, my whole system is not able to fully relax. And what we're trying to do is facilitate a parasympathetic nervous system response. We're trying to get the nervous system to calm down. The sensory mechanisms can impact and influence our brain and thusly our whole energy being. This to me is not calming. This is a more excitatory, because then I want to really and get really loud. And I'm going to bounce off and there could be safety issues. And I haven't even really said, make sure the area you work in is clear enough and safe enough. I'll show you one other thing. This is my client. Now, I wouldn't put my client face down. maybe something like this. But then I may want to put some weight on my client. How many of you kids, how many of you parents or guardians have worked with kids who like, I want more weight, more. Well, they may not know where that tipping point is of too much. That's like why adult supervision is needed. But the point is made that they do need more. So I'm cautiously going to share this with you because I've just found this to be very, very helpful. And I have done this for 35 years with individuals plus. Sometimes kids really like, heavy pressure. So very carefully, I may press on this ball. So you can see there's a little bit of indentation here, right? And I want to try to, as long as the person is breathing and they're safe, and I'm going to check in. Are you doing okay? You know, I mean, look at their face and see if they're okay. Feel the energy. It may be too much, but it may be really soothing. It's so worthwhile that I feel it's that important to show you. So to take this ball, I'm putting a little bit of pressure, okay? If I just do a little bit, it's not enough. So I want to put some pressure and then cover. Reminding my client to take several slow, deep breaths. And you too, maybe a couple of deep breaths. We slowly peel off. Slow. You may want to wiggle your fingers and your toes before you get up. And when you do get up slowly. So I hope this has been helpful to you all. Some of you, this might be a little bit of a review. Best wishes. These exercise balls can be really helpful to you all. So I hope that helps. Take good care, everybody. Still planning on doing these live demos on Wednesdays, about 1:15. And then look for some special events. Also know, got a couple musicians that are working with me. So those of you that would like music in your sessions, that's something else that's available. So be creative, take good care, and we'll see you another time. Bye, everybody.